So I want to introduce Laura, who I met, I think because we both attended a committee meeting for IWF Global, and she said, oh, let's just talk. And so we had a lot to talk about. And when I found out what her expertise was, I said, oh, you got to tell us more about this, because she uses neuroscience to help women be good communicators and good influencers, despite all the odds that we're up against in a gendered world. And she is not only just a certified executive coach, she's also the founder of the Bertio Group, and has been featured on all kinds of national media, ABC, Huffington Post Live, Dr. Oz, and US News and World Report. It goes on and on. So she is actively helping people be intentional in using what we know about neuroscience in their communication and their persuasion. So she's very much in demand as a keynoter, and has spoken to Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Volvo, Price Waterhouse, and more. She's included in 100 Truly Amazing Women.
Well, that's everyone here. So you're, I mean, you know.
So she is a very much in demand guest speaker, and I'm just so pleased that she's going to talk with us tonight about the neuroscience of influence through conversational intelligence. So Laura Berger.
Thank you so much. And I do also want to share with you some great news that I had actually fall of 2020. I became a trustee to the Committee for Economic Development and the Conference Board. And that has been a whirlwind experience, fire hose type of experience. And I really feel that what I'm sharing with you here today is something that I intend to bring to CED and the Conference Board, and those conversations that are happening in Washington with Congress and so forth. So I mean, that is an aspiration of mine. So I just wanted to point that out as well. And then with having said that, what I'm about to share with you, it's a very condensed version. I had the opportunity to share it with women corporate directors. I share it with, you know, individual clients and their teams, their executive teams, their boards. I've, you know, presented it at executive retreats. And so what we're going to do here is it's a condensed version of that. So you're just going to get a taste of it all. We're going to try to stick to the time and then open it up for questions. I have Jackie here to also help with Mary, you know, manage the chat. This is going to be very interactive. I'd like you to either speak or put it in the chat, and we will incorporate it into our discussion. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. Of which, do I have access? Am I a co-host? Because
you should be. I've allowed everyone to share a screen, so you should be able to share. You hit share, you should be able to do it.
Here, let me pull it up. Share. Share. And I'm just going to go right into slideshow. Okay, does everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to open the chat myself as well. All right, so let's get started. I'd like you to just share with me, either in the chat or verbally, what is happening in this picture. What do you think is happening in this picture?
It looks like parallel play to me.
Parallel play.
Nobody's playing with each other, though.
Nobody's playing with each other. Parallel
next
play
to each other.
No verbal communication.
No verbal communication.
No verbal communication. Okay. What else?
Janine Rabin said a shared meal but disconnected, with lunchtime at the office, no attention, no eye contact. These are just some of the chats that are coming through,
Right.
messages.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So what's happening in this picture?
Mary says body language is 95% of communication and no one is looking.
Yeah.
Standoff.
Standoff. It's a standoff.
A power grab from Susie Bowie.
Power grab. What else is happening?
An argument.
An argument.
Well, I love the little balloons and the progression from the bottom to the top. The bottom is like, let's be conciliatory and work it out. And the top is what their body language reflects. It's a standoff.
The body language doesn't match the verbal from Mary Louise. And the dude looks calm and collected, cool and collected. She looks ready to fight from Janine Rabin.
Right.
Great.
And what about this? What's happening in this picture?
Collaboration.
Yeah.
Mm.
Collegial conference.
Mm.
Nice diverse group.
We've got listening, good communication, and a good meeting, teamwork.
Good distribution of men and women.
We also interestingly have boss rules and everybody listens from Mary Ruiz.
Okay, great. So the reason why I put you through this is, you know, often clients come to us and they say, help us understand our culture and, you know, help us change our culture and how can you study culture? And really getting to the next level of greatness depends on the quality of the culture, which depends on the quality of the relationships, which then depends on the quality of the conversations. Everything happens through conversation. And this is what is going on here. Everything that you were seeing in that slide, a conversation was being had, whether it was through text messaging, whether it was through nonverbal communication, whether it was through collaboration, it was all happening through conversation. And why does that matter? When you think about the brain operates in patterns. And so, you know, every conversation that we have with someone creates a response, a neurochemical response. Some conversations that you have with people create that, you know, good feeling. Other conversations that you have with people do not. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about here, is kind of the science behind all of that. But remember, again, everything that you do, if you want to shift culture, you have got to look at the conversations that are happening at the very, very minute level of an organization. Now I'd like you to read this quote. What comes forward when you read this quote? How many of you have felt that way in a conversation?
From Leela Gray, a message sent is not a message received. Double talk, gibberish. Happens frequently from Sue Romanos.
Sure.
Both sides are failing to express and understand clearly from Nancy.
Sure. And this happens all the time in business, where you have a leader going to a direct report and saying, yeah, I need to, you know, take a look at our budget. Can you please bring the budget? And then what they bring to them is not what the leader really even asked for. Fine, the budget is a very general statement, but it was something specific that that leader thought that he or she was requesting, and it fell completely flat. Because how we are receiving information is often not how it's is often not how it's being communicated. But we think we're communicating it very clearly, but we're not communicating it very clearly. So, I mean, this happens personally, you know, with spouses, and I'm sure we could come up with numerous, you know, examples that just make us laugh out loud of, okay, well, I thought I told you to take the garbage out. Well, no, you didn't tell me you want me to take the garbage out now. And then they took the garbage out 12 hours later. So, you know, this is something that is on a daily basis that we all have to struggle with as it relates to communication and conversations. So now I'd like you to think of an experience when something that was done while conversing created a hijack. And what I mean by a hijack is you know, got very upset, you argued, debated, positioned yourself, maybe you walked away. Just think of an experience that you had recently at work, personally. Does everybody have that? Does anybody want to share something? An experience that created a hijack? What comes to mind?
From Beth, I said, when you get a chance, will you, and he heard, do it now. That's the tension. From Ruth, Laura, my expression, throwing someone under the bus.
Yeah.
Another one from Mary. I was on the phone with my brother and I said the phone wasn't working. He thought I said he wasn't working. He blew up.
Yeah, sure. All right. And how did that make you feel? Just some comments in the chat, or if people just want to, you know, we have a small enough group that you can just share verbally as well.
Furious. It's very frustrating. Or a couple.
All right. So I want you to take a look at this.
Aw,
Oh, that's what I say. Aw, isn't that
Lena,
nice?
check this out.
Yeah.
That's my dog.
Aw. How does this make you feel when you see this?
Tummy rubs are the best part of the day. Yay.
Nice. Yeah. So when we are listening to connect, the interaction that you're feeling is one that's creating trust and safety, like it's safe and positive. And this is kind of why I put this forward. Here are two dogs playing with one another. And if you think about the conversations that you have, when you're in a safe environment, the word psychological safety has come up over and over again, you know, being talked among executives on a pretty frequent basis. When people are feeling safe and positive, what happens is we're producing more oxytocin and dopamine. And we've all had these conversations where you're like, oh, that feels really good. And you know, you think about, again, the brain and how it functions with patterns. So why am I sharing this with you? Right? Like what can we learn from this exercise? Basically, the neocortex, which is a part of your brain, it's above the primitive part of your brain. The neocortex is responsible for creating scripts in our brains. Now, what does that mean? What that means is, because there's like any interaction that I have with you, and any one of you, and we have a great conversation, that conversation is going to be mapped in my brain so that I can go back in, and when I see you again, I'm going to call up my memory of who you are. Oh, I had a really nice conversation. I felt safe. I felt like I could trust this person. And that is residing in your neocortex. That's the script where it's residing. Now, you know, on the other hand, mapping also picks up patterns that make you feel cautious or anxious or distrusting. And your body is going to record that as well. Of like, oh, every time I go into a meeting with this person, you know, his energy is just off the charts and it drives me crazy. And so that's your neocortex storing that data that then sets you up to go into this mode. And you can change that, basically. You can change the neural networks of your brain so that you can change the script of your neocortex. So what is conversational intelligence? It's basically a hardwired ability to connect, navigate, and grow alongside one another. Now, the most distinct component of this is it's a platform for building trust. And I'm not sure if any of you attended Edie Weiner, the IWF futurist. She spoke last week. She was phenomenal. And one of the things that she talked about is she basically said trust is a luxury, and luxury defined as it's much wanted and it's in short supply. And this goes down to every conversation that you're having with each other. Do I trust this person? You know, am I going to lean into them? Am I going to engage with them, or am I going to retreat? And so conversational intelligence is a platform that is going to help build trust and actually change the neurochemistry. So what it enables us to learn basically is listening to connect, which I just kind of spoke to a little bit. And it's by creating that safe and positive interaction. It's also intentional action through our words. Words are worlds. And to give you an example, when you hear the word feedback, oh, I'm getting feedback, that often creates a negative connotation towards it. So it literally, you know, intentional action through our words and conversations is getting us to think differently about how we go into a conversation, how we communicate and convey the messaging that we want to convey. And then nudging people. How can you influence through changing neural networks? How can you influence through changing your own neural networks as well as others' neural networks? So let's talk a little bit about the brain and what's happening in the brain. I already talked about the neocortex, but let's go back to the examples of experiencing an amygdala hijack versus the interconnectedness, the listening to connect feeling that you've experienced in conversations. When you are in an amygdala hijack, what is happening in the brain is your cortisol levels are upregulating. They're increasing. Your adrenaline is increasing. And why that is important is because when you have an excess of cortisol, your brain is going to keep you in the primitive part of, which is where the amygdala resides. So it's the fight, flee, freeze, appease scenario. It's going to keep you locked in there. But the only way for it to physiologically access the prefrontal cortex, which is where trust resides, is by decreasing cortisol levels and increasing oxytocin and dopamine levels. And oxytocin and dopamine levels are that feel good, you know, the two dogs playing, the listening to connect, that safety, that trust. And in order for you to access that, you have got to decrease your cortisol levels. So how can you do that? How can you Cindy or Beth or Leanne, how can you actually go in and change the neurochemistry of someone else? I mean, is that even possible? And yes, it is. It absolutely is, because the body works in patterns again. So when our prefrontal cortex opens up, this is when you can access the executive brain. And the executive brain is, where innovative thinking occurs, where strategic thought takes place, where that collaboration and co-creation is taking place. Your brain is actually being primed to do those things when it's operating from the prefrontal cortex, versus in the amygdala, you can't do that. And then the other thing that I want to point out is the limbic brain. The limbic part of your brain is responsible for how you're going to, it's the tribal brain. That's the way that I would describe it. That's kind of the assessment of, am I in the tribe or am I outside of the tribe? And that goes back to anthropology. Like, am I part of the tribe or am I outside of the tribe? And if I feel like I'm outside of the tribe, I'm going to shut down. I'm going to retreat. I'm going to walk away. If I feel like I'm in the tribe, okay, I'm going to move a little closer. This feels trusting. This feels open to me. And the limbic brain is responsible for that. So it's actually assessing, like, okay, am I in? Am I out? How do I feel? And then that's going to help either upregulate cortisol levels or upregulate oxytocin levels. So I'd like to share a tool to help you navigate conversation. And this is a conversational dashboard. And I'm going to put it into an example, a recent example. So one of our clients, incoming CEO, and in this position, they're in the process of doing a reduction in force, a RIF. And the board has come and said to her, look, we're really top heavy and we need to make some changes. And one of the discussions was for her to go to all of the EVPs and say, hey, please give us a list of people that you feel that, we could unfortunately exit the organization and make these difficult decisions. Now, and I'm not going to go into all the board dynamics that were going on because of time, but what I am going to share with you is when we brought the dashboard up. Now, remember, this is a new CEO, okay, trying to feel her way with the board, with the EVPs, everything. And I said to her, well, let me walk you through this dashboard. And so the dashboard is helping identify where you reside in conversation with someone else. So you can see to the left of the dashboard, you'll see I at the bottom of it. To the right of the dashboard, you see we. And truthfully, there are reasons for all of us to be at different parts of this dashboard for different reasons. So it's not as if one is bad and the other is fabulous. I mean, I was in an executive meeting with the CFO of a company. I'm giving you an example of when it's not bad. The CFO and the chief medical officer, who also a family-owned company. And the CFO was very skeptical of the clinical numbers that were coming in. He's the CFO. He feels like, I'm the CFO. I need to be skeptical. I need to, map this out. So meanwhile, the CEO was like, well, I'm skeptical about how you're coming to me and telling me that my clinical numbers are down. And in using this dashboard, we had a conversation of like, okay, well, what's it gonna take to get you to move to wait and see? And it's usually three things that are at stake when it comes to trust. I don't trust the person, I don't trust the process, or I don't trust the technology. Now the CFO is saying, I don't trust this process. Like, this is not working for me. And what came out of that conversation with the two of them and myself was the chief medical officer and one of the owners of the company said, I don't trust you. I have a hard time trusting you. But what it was he brought this CFO in to take this, billion-dollar business to higher stakes, and the CFO was doing his job. So it wasn't even that he didn't trust the CFO. He just felt as if he was letting the CFO tell him what to do with his money. This came out in a conversation of the two of them. So the CFO, was a skeptic for reasonable reasons. And what we were able to do is we were able to move them across the dashboard to experimenter mode, which is where you're actually accessing the prefrontal cortex of like, okay, we've figured out the root of the issue here. Now, how can we move forward? And it was a very, very opening conversation for the two of them. Now, back to the CEO and the EVP. The one EVP came and had 4 people to eliminate, but only brought 2. And the 2 that he wanted to eliminate were not what the board had wanted. And the board had made it pretty clear, like, we don't see the value. So in working with the CEO, it was, okay, well, where are you on the dashboard? And she was at a wait and see. She's like, well, I got to wait and see how the board is going to respond to this, what I can do to get the board to move to experimenter level, and what I can do to get the EVP to move to experimenter level. So it wasn't, oh, let's go to co-create. It wasn't definitely that. It was, let's get them to just nudge a little bit. And the outcome of that was very positive. The board, the EVP, and the CEO all came to an agreement. One of the EVPs actually being asked to exit himself, and they netted out doing something very, what felt like a win-win in a really difficult situation. And I'm sure many of you have experienced this in your own, in your own fields of operation in business, where you're having to deal with very difficult decisions. And so the dashboard creates a tool to say, okay, how am I showing up? Am I a resistor? Where do I want to move towards? Or asking the other person, okay, where are you on the dashboard? We have executive teams that are using this in their meetings of like, this is how I'm showing up. So how do you do this? How do you shift? How do you move across the dashboard? The brain is designed for navigating. Okay, navigating, and you can navigate in many different ways. You can navigate fear-based. You can navigate by excluding people, by withholding information, by criticizing. Yeah, sure, you can navigate your way that way, but how far are you going to get? The more that you can move from withholding information to sharing information, from judging to appreciating, the more you are going to upregulate oxytocin levels. So asking the question of this EVP, what if we could come up with a scenario that would feel good for you? What would that look like? Versus you need to cut 4 people. And these were the conversations that they were having. Now, the CEO could have gone in and said, hey, I'm being told by the board that we're top heavy. And yes, I mean, it's important to bring those facts forward, but it's how. It's not the what, it's the how you move through the conversation. Because what you're wanting to do is look at the outcome that you want to create. Intentional outcome, intentional action with outcome. So what can you do to make this EVP or make this CFO feel appreciated and put them in that space where they feel comfortable and are going to be open versus closed. So what can you do effectively? Or what can you do immediately to raise your CIQ level? So there's a couple of things. Ask for questions for which you have no answer. What do I mean by that? How many of you have been in a conversation where you were, and I'm going to use Law and Order, like leading the witness, like, oh, you're going to ask a question because you want them to respond a certain way, so you can either agree or disagree with it. That's positional conversation. Or maybe you're asking a question, but you're not even listening to what they're saying to you, because you're just already, you know, coming up with your response. You're just like, oh, whatever. I didn't hear a word you're saying, and now I'm going to just tell you exactly what I mean, and that's it. You may or may not know this, but what do you think is the number one issue for well, I guess I'll generalize it, but the number one issue that people have, what do you think it is? Just shout it out. What do you think the number one issue people have?
Listening.
Listening.
Not feeling heard.
Not feeling heard. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Control.
Control, right? Yep.
Not being valued.
Not being valued.
Bias.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. And what does that stem from?
Lack of trust.
Lack of trust.
Fear that something's going to be taken away from you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Difficulty with one's self-esteem.
The number one thing that comes up is addicted to being right. We are addicted to being right. Whether it's our self-esteem that's getting in the way, whether it's, you know, listening, you're not listening, it's addicted to being right. We all want to be right. And we're all going to, you've all heard of confirmation bias and how we want to move into that state of just kind of, you know, building our case. And so when you ask questions for which you have no answer, you're not building your case. You're not addicted to being right. You're not positioning yourself. You are creating the space to access the prefrontal cortex. You are creating that opportunity for another person to truly move into exploratory mode. So back to the CEO and the EVP, how can we guide this situation to a new or positive outcome? What does that look like? That puts your brain in a totally different physiological state. It puts you into that discovery and exploration. That's really interesting. You know, what can we do to combine the best of our thinking? It doesn't matter what the biggest challenge is that you have. If you can come from a place of not leading the witness, not ordering the court, and ask questions for which you have no answer, that's going to move the brain and the neuro and change the neuroplasticity of the brain. And the more that you facilitate this, the more the neocortex is going to remember, oh, now when I go into conversations with the EVP, we're able to co-create with one another. We're able to come up with new ideas by merging our ideas together. And that in itself is going to continue and going to be fueled by the conversations that you're having. Reframing. So what do I mean by reframing? Instead of saying, well, why can't you do this? Back to the example that I gave of leader going and saying, I need to see this budget, and the team member giving them something and going, well, that's not what I asked you for. Why can't you do this? Okay, well, how about reframe it? How do you want it to be different? Share with me how you want it to be different. So that changes the conversation. It's not, why can't you do this? How do you want it to be different? Let's explore that. So you always want to move the brain into an exploratory mode. words are worlds. I mentioned that at the onset of our discussion. And there's trillions of conversations. There's 16,000 words per day. And 9 out of 10 miss the mark because we're not being intentional with our actions, because we're just moving throughout our day and we're saying, hey, why can't you do this? Or why didn't you get me that? Words are worlds. And I want to give you another example. We did some work with Walt Disney World. I'd like you to think about the word engineer. Engineer. What comes to mind when you think of the word engineer?
Leanne. Create.
Yeah. What else?
My sons from Cindy.
My sons. Yep. What
Solving
else?
problems is another one from Carla. Can predict when a structure will hold.
Can predict when a structure will hold.
Someone technical.
Someone technical. What else?
Linear from Jan.
Linear.
Creating, imagining.
Ah, yes, yes. Now, listen to the word Imagineer. What does that say to you? Imagineer.
Creative from Lucy.
Disney.
Disney, right?
Possibilities from Susie.
Innovate.
Innovate.
No limits.
Can you say that again?
No limits.
No limits. No limits.
And excitement. With all that comes excitement.
Excitement. Excitement. Yeah. And the word collaborate, you know, collaborate, it's interesting because if you look in the dictionary, collaboration means cohorting with the enemy. And so sometimes when you're told to go collaborate with one another, it can feel, I got to collaborate with this person. And that again goes back to the patterns of words have meanings. They already have meanings embedded within them. So engineers have meaning embedded within them based on, you know, your experience with that word, which is why it's brilliant to come up with a completely new word. So if you go back to the dashboard, and I'll just pull it back up for you real quick, you can see the far end of the dashboard is not collaborate, it's co-create. This is co-creation. Do you see the distinction between that? I mean, now we're in a co-creative space versus a collaborative space. It just has a different feel to it. It has more of an aspirational feel towards it. And the more that you can incorporate that into, you know, your culture at an organization and come up with different ways to communicate. I mean, even I was on the phone with a client the other day and he's talking to me about, yeah, we have a postmortem. We have a postmortem. And I was like, oh, you know, postmortem. Why are we using postmortem in businesses to you know, review what went down? You know, come up with something different, right? And so he went back to the team and he said, hey, let's come up with something different. And they did, because those words have a meaning and they have a feeling attached to it. And when you're going into a postmortem, it's like, oh, here we go, we're going into a, and it kind of like sinks you down and puts you in that state where you're not really excited about it. So think about that as well.
Laura, just really quickly, it's 6:25. Just wanted to let you know.
Thank you very much. Well, so we're at the end, and I wanted to actually share this with you. I got this last week. You see the quote up there. It says, I saw this and thought of all the work you do to reprogram me. And this was from a client, and she had no idea that I was actually speaking on this topic this week, but this is what she sent me. So There is nothing wrong with you because this is how we are wired. Our brains are wired the way they are, and we have more control over our brains because of neuroplasticity. And neuroscience is a new science. You know, we're learning things every single day of how the different neural networks communicate with one another. So I would urge you and encourage you to start tapping into it in a way that's going to shift the conversations and shift your neocortex. So that's it. Any questions?
Questions for Laura? Wonderful presentation, Laura. It's really given me a lot to think about. Questions for Laura? So I guess I'm wondering if there are gender differences or if our neurobiology is enough alike that those differences are not important when we're trying to move people toward the oxytocin.
Ah, well, that's an interesting question that I wish that I had the answer to. And I do not. What I can share in that area is women can often produce more oxytocin levels just based on the fact that we have children. And if you think about a child and holding a child and caring for a child, bearing a child, a woman's oxytocin levels are elevated just in that physiological aspect. So as a woman has a child, that definitely impacts it. So it may be, you know, at times, but I can't, I wish I could speak to that, but I can't.
So Ruth Brophy wants to know how this neuroscience relates to what people have been calling emotional intelligence in the business literature.
Yeah, well, emotional intelligence is a little bit different because, and I do a lot of work in the area of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is looking at specific behaviors. So for example, when we administer EQI 2.0, we're going to dive into, okay, let's look at this individual's flexibility. Let's look at this individual's impulse control. Now, that absolutely plays into conversational intelligence because if you are if you are looking to hone your impulses and manage your impulses more effectively, then the way you move through conversation is going to play into that as well. So they're intertwined, most definitely, but the neurochemistry is a combination of behaviors versus emotional intelligence is, okay, let's look specifically at someone's flexibility. Let's look at someone's emotional expression. Now, your emotional expression, for example, can impact the neurochemistry. So if you're sitting and you're slouching in your chair and you know you're not smiling, that's probably going to have an impact on whether you are being well received by someone. So they definitely interplay with one another. The other thing that I will say is emotional intelligence plays into conversational intelligence. Have you heard the term emotional contagion? Have any of you heard that term? Emotional contagion is, you know, the amygdala. When someone is experiencing an amygdala hijack and then it has a ripple effect in everybody that's sitting in that boardroom of like, oh, whoa, what's going on? So that there's absolute overlap there. But conversational intelligence is really about the words, how you are communicating, how you're communicating without judgment, how are you communicating in an open fashion, how you're being transparent, how are you celebrating, how are you appreciating people.
Thank you. Other questions? I've looked in the chat. I don't see any more. One question people have asked Laura is, will the slides be available?
Sure.
If you could send me the slides, then I'll make sure that everybody who signed on today will have access to them.
Yeah.
I have an observation.
Yeah.
I am unmuted. I'm up at Harvard with this advanced leadership initiative. So there's 50 people who don't know each other at all. And they're from really all over the world, and virtually they are from all over the world right now. So we're spending 2 days on how do you get to know each other, because this is a cohort that is, the whole intent is to find collaborations and work for social impact. So it's 2 days, and this was Marshall Gantz, if anybody is aware of his work, and it's about how you do create trust and campaigns. So I thought this was very interesting because we started with small groups and sharing things about yourself, and really kind of intimate things about yourself. And it really did work to begin to create that trust. So it was fascinating to see your slides, to see what was actually going on in our minds when we were doing this. So thank you for that. And thank you for being available for this kind of conversation.
Of course. Of course.
So we're at the end of our time. So this is the last call for questions or kudos, because I'm getting all kinds of congratulations for you, Laura, on the chat. That people have really enjoyed this and learned a lot from it. So thank you for doing it for us.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we'll recess, and you're free to leave without feeling like you're abandoning us. The end of the program is here. And I'll stick around for a few minutes if anybody wants to stay after for some informal chat.
Thank you all. I've got to go,
Yes,
unfortunately. But thank you for the talk. Wonderful to see everybody.
Thanks,
And,
Beth.
Thanks so
Bye.
much. This was really terrific. Thank you, Laura.
You're very welcome.
Laura, it was really great. Thank you so much.
Terrific, thank you.
Good to see you all.
Good to see you.
Well,
Thank you.
Everyone.
And thank you very much. It's nice meeting you all. Look forward to more time together.
Home run, Laura.
Oh, thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Good night, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Mary, for
Laura.
keeping me on track.
You didn't need too much coaching. You're a pro. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.